Next up, probably a subject we don't need to do because everybody here in this room is assured that our elections are fair and honest and there's never any shenanigans. But on the off chance that you think they could be fixed just a bit, we have two experts. I think you'll enjoy this. First for the conversation will be Heather Honey. Heather is the president of Haystacks LLC. It's a consulting firm specializing in investigations, audits, and training. She was the lead investigator supporting President Trump in his defense when they attempted to put him on trial for January 6th. Heather has done work on election integrity and investigations to help in many causes across the state and across the nation, and she is the co-founder of Pennsylvanians for Fair Elections. Joining her on stage is someone you may know or someone you know by reading articles about his work, one of Pennsylvania's leading attorneys fighting for election fairness, making sure that the rule of law is followed, that the laws of Pennsylvania are upheld, and that when the legislature says that absentee or mail-in ballots are due by a date and they have to be signed and dated, it's probably because the legislature meant that absentee or mail-in ballots have to be turned in on time and have to be signed and dated. That radical attorney who believes in the rule of law and that words have meaning is Wally Zimolong. Wally has dedicated himself in his professional career to being a conservative's conservative, fighting for causes that we all hold dear, but has really made his mark the last several years on election integrity. His clients have included President Trump and Senator Dave McCormick, as the other side took days, weeks, and a month counting and recounting and fighting to argue that there were many ways to recount and count ballots, and they kept looking under sofa cushions and in the trunks of cars for ballot. But at the end of the day, because of the leadership and intelligence and integrity of Wally Zimolong, Dave McCormick is in the United States Senate because every legally cast ballot was counted. So please welcome to the stage two experts in the field of fair elections, Heather Honey and Wally Zimolong.
Thank you. So many of you may not know this, but Pennsylvania is one of only 3 states in the country that has a divided legislature. 47 states have single-party control of the legislature. In fact, only 11 states have a divided government at all. Most states have single-party control of the legislature, both sides, and the governor. So Pennsylvania is unique among unique states. But the good news is there are some things that we can do to secure our elections, even in a divided government. And so we're going to start off talking a little bit about a surprise that we got last week from the president. One of the things that we can do to secure elections in our divided government is to have the President of the United States use his executive authority to issue an executive order. So last week he issued his executive order regarding the preservation and protection of integrity in U.S. elections. Now, we don't have time to go through all of the details of it, but what we're going to talk about today to get started is I'm going to run through the 9 sections of that EO, and then we're going to talk about how that's going to impact us here. So real quickly, and again, I'm just hitting the high points here. The first section is just establishing that it's a priority of this administration to protect our elections. Section 2 is specifically about citizenship and making sure that only citizens are voting in the United States. Absolutely, right? So it directs the Attorney General to prioritize prosecution of non-citizens who vote. It directs the Department of Homeland Security to make available for free databases of non-citizens. Now, the interesting language in this EO, in this part, is that it makes the databases available not just to state officials, but also to local officials, so that if a state election official does not wish to take advantage of these databases that can give you information on non-citizens, county and local officials can have access to that data as well. Section 3 of the EO is about providing additional assistance to states to verify the identity and eligibility of folks who are registering to vote. That includes instructing the Attorney General to ensure compliance with HAVA and the NVRA, and to make data available, again, for the purpose of verification of voter registration information and maintenance of voter rolls. Section 4 is improving the EAC. That's updating and amending the VVSG, which is the Voluntary Voting System Guidelines. And in order to put a carrot on states' compliance with those voluntary voting system guidelines, he ordered the Department of Homeland Security and FEMA to consider ways that they could provision funding on whether or not states choose to accept those voluntary guidelines. Section 5 is the prioritization of prosecution of election crimes, including providing false information on voter registration applications. Section 6 is about improving the security of our electronic voting systems, and they have to evaluate, the Department of Homeland Security must evaluate the security of all voting systems and all voter registration systems. And the Department of Homeland Security will also prioritize keeping non-citizens from being involved in the administration of elections. Section 7 is a national day of election, directs the Attorney General to enforce a uniform and non-discriminatory ballot receipt deadline of Election Day. Section 8 is preventing foreign interference in election and the unlawful use of federal funds. So the Attorney General and the Secretary of Treasury are supposed to prioritize preventing foreign funding from getting into our elections, and also the long overdue making sure that people who are receiving federal funds are not lobbying in the government. And then finally, Section 9, the final section, is instructing every agency of the federal government to take a look at how the agencies in the prior administration weaponized their agencies as a sort of campaign arm of the Biden administration. And so each agency has to report on what actions they've taken to repeal Biden's executive order and get the tentacles of that out of their department. So before the ink even dried on that, there were lawsuits filed by the DNC, by Chuck Schumer and others. So Wally, what are your thoughts on this EO, and what are the prospects?
Sure. Thank you first, Heather, for that introduction, and thank you, Pennsylvania Leadership Council, for having me. And also, thank you, President Trump, and thank you, Senator McCormick, for making election integrity a central tenet of your respective campaigns. We have President Trump in the White House, and we have Dave McCormick as a United States Senator because they made election integrity a priority. And this is what an election looks like when candidates make election integrity a priority. The executive order is a furtherance of that priority. Promises made, promises kept. Primarily, as you said, the executive order sets policies and priorities for the Trump administration. He is signaling that it is important for the administration to have election integrity in all our elections. What's interesting is, what mechanisms does he have to make it a priority? Certainly, from an enforcement perspective, directing the Attorney General and other U.S. attorneys to prosecute election integrity-related crimes is a clear authority of the president under Article 2. And we've actually seen this in place. I don't know if you saw just recently, our great new United States District Attorney for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, David Metcalf, took guilty pleas for 3 local officials, Democrat officials in Eastern Pennsylvania, for engaging in blatant election fraud, where they tried to fabricate voters, fabricate mailed votes so that they could keep their own seats. All of this stuff that the left and the mainstream media tells you repeatedly doesn't happen and doesn't exist. You can point to that as Exhibit A of election fraud happening. And it's because President Trump put U.S. Attorney Metcalf in there that we have 3 guilty pleas, and those folks are going to spend time in federal jail. The other issue is, what authority does the president have to direct, I think, the election day and to direct the voter registration form and the use of certain forms of identification to determine whether or not there are only United States citizens voting? And it overlaps with a larger issue and many other cases that we're facing, that the Trump administration is facing, which is, what's the deal with these independent agencies? We always hear about these independent agencies. And President Trump is sort of taking on these deep state, swampy independent agencies and saying, wait a minute, these are executive branch agencies. I control the executive branch. Congress doesn't control the executive branch. The judicial branch tries to control the executive branch, but we'll see how that plays out. So there's something called the Election Assistance Commission, the EAC. Congress has said this commission shall come up with the uniform form that is used to register to vote. And President Trump is exercising his Article 2 power as President of the United States to say that is a commission that falls under my purview, and I'm going to tell that commission what to do. Article 2 says, I, the president, not Congress, not the judicial branch, has the duty to see that the laws in this country are faithfully executed. And I'm going to do that. I'm going to see that the laws in this country that clearly and forever have prohibited foreign aliens from voting in our elections, we're going to see that doesn't happen. So he has made that directive to the EAC to change its form. What the suits have been about is whether he has that authority. Just like we've seen suits, does he have the authority to fire folks in the National Labor Relations Board or the Federal Trade Commission? And some courts have said he does. So what the DNC, the League of Women Voters, which is just an extension of the DNC, and 19 attorney generals I also saw filed suit in Massachusetts, they are challenging whether or not President Trump has the authority to direct this agency, the EAC, to change that form. It's sort of a narrow suit. That's what it's all about. The other things that you mentioned, most of them, with the exception of maybe the election day thing, I think are untouchable, unassailable, and as far as I know, haven't been challenged yet.
So the interesting thing, though, is that, even if these things do end up, if there's a victory in court and all of these elements of the executive order that we just talked about, even if they are successful and they all stand, they're only good as long as he is the executive in charge, because the next Democrat administration that comes in will most certainly repeal his executive orders, issue new executive orders. So the only way to make sure that these are lasting changes, that all of these things are lasting changes and more, is through legislation. Now, as I mentioned when we started, Pennsylvania is in a particularly challenging spot when it comes to legislation, but I do think that there are some things where we can find some level of, kind of middle ground. And so for starters, the issue of transparency, right? So in some cases, the Commonwealth Court has actually asked the legislature to clarify issues related to transparency. For example, the one most absurd example is that the election code allows the public access to all mail and absentee ballots and the executed envelopes, but the courts and the Department of State has said, well, you can have the mail and absentee ballots, but you can't have the election day ballots. So when the court has heard about that, they've said, hey, the legislature really needs to clarify this because it's not quite right. What are some other legislative priorities that you think are feasible despite our divided legislature here?
Yeah, Heather, you make an excellent point. Article 1, Clause 4, or Section 4, Clause 1 of the United States Constitution vests primary responsibility on the means and methods of elections with the individual states. That's actually one of the arguments that the DNC and others are making. But the clause also says, except as Congress may modify. So that's the tension that's going on with the Trump's executive order. But by and large, I don't think anybody really disputes that most of the nitty-gritty in election integrity happens at the state level, and even the executive order recognizes that. So yeah, if we want lasting change, it has to happen at the state level. Pennsylvania's outdated election code, often contradictory, arcane, and tough to navigate, begs for comprehensive reform. Where I see something that is bipartisan, that enjoys wide popular support, is voter ID. I mean, look at Wisconsin. Wisconsin, we lost a Supreme Court seat in Wisconsin to a far-left progressive Supreme Court justice. But at the same time, Wisconsin voters voted to enshrine in their constitution voter ID. The last time I checked, voter ID in Pennsylvania has something like a 70 to 80% approval rating. That's something that should be passed along across the board. You get voter ID, you don't have to worry about far left-wing judges getting elected, right? It ends it. They're gone. We'll have a majority forever. So voter ID is something I think that we should see. I think maybe clarifying in some way and enshrining perhaps from a constitutional amendment, you got to sign and date the ballot. You know, it's already in the election code, but the left, they are very good at this. The left never gives up. I think we're catching up to them on that. They never give up. We just had another case come down this week over the issue of when and how mailed ballots need to be dated. They don't give up. They lost the Third Circuit. The Supreme Court rejected them. They came back. They asked the court to amend their complaint. Well, we got another theory. So it's remarkable. But I think that, you know, to really put an end to a lot of these shenanigans, the General Assembly has to act. I think there's popular support, first and foremost, for voter ID. Pennsylvania needs voter ID, and it should happen immediately.
Absolutely. I agree with you there. Yeah. And it's such a popular issue across the aisle that I don't think we need to be giving up everything to get it, right? It should be a standalone. Everybody should agree on it, make sure that it is good. However, over the last few years, legislation has been a challenge. So some of the changes, some of the improvements to our election system have come as a result of litigation. And in your introduction, they talked a little bit about some of the successes that you have had. Other folks have sued for other types of, access for list maintenance lawsuits in that regard as well. But there's a couple examples of things that you were involved in that I think are really, really exciting. So Chester County drop boxes. Can you tell us a little bit about how you used litigation to secure the drop boxes in Chester County?
Yeah, litigation is always a last resort because it's a little bit of a crapshoot. You're left to the decision of a judge who may or may not agree with you. And also, I think for election integrity litigation to be successful, you have to be realistic in what you're asking for. And that also, that often leads to very kind of narrow wins. But you got to, what I told Heather before was you got to build the string site. You got to get the small cases before you go and get a run. You can score a run by singles and doubles just as easily as you can score a run hitting a home run. So one of the things we did in Chester County is we approached it from, listen, you can have your drop boxes, but you have to have drop box security. So we didn't say you have to disenfranchise anybody, as they say, or you didn't say you had to get rid of them. We didn't say don't count anything that's put in there. But what we said is if you're going to have drop boxes, you got to treat them like polling places. You just wouldn't let anybody walk into a polling place, sign the poll book, and just vote, or just, hey, the poll book workers went to lunch. Honor system, sign in. That's a little bit how unmonitored drop boxes are. No one's watching them. Anybody can put anything in there. What was remarkable, because of a grassroots effort, we obtained surveillance footage that the county surveillance, and it showed people coming up, putting in 5, 10, 15, 20 ballots into the drop box. One person, we actually referred to the Chester County District Attorney because it was blatant that this person filled out someone else's ballot, got on the cell phone, filled out someone's ballot, put it in the drop box. So we showed all that information to the judge in Chester County, and we had a courageous judge in that instance. And what he said is, yeah, you're right. There has to be some level of security. And Chester County, a Democrat county, agreed. They said, this is crazy. We have to put in some regulations here. So they have surveillance of these drop boxes. They have drop box monitoring. They've put out regulations that said, look, reminding people you can't put more than one ballot into that drop box. You can only put your own in there. And I think, as far as I know, these are the toughest ballot drop box security measures in the Commonwealth that we got through litigation. But keep in mind, that litigation was something that we went to be realistic with. We weren't asking, because we knew we weren't going to get a situation where they got rid of the drop boxes. We said, look, if you're going to have the drop boxes, common sense says you got to have some level of security around them.
Absolutely. So, the one way that you can get rid of drop boxes is to have a Board of Election decide not to use them. And so that brings us to our final way in a divided government that we could really secure our elections, and that is through education. Specifically educating the members of the Board of Elections in each and every county. In Pennsylvania, they have an enormous amount of authority And in most counties, of course, the Board of Elections is made up of the county commissioners. Now, the county commissioners have a lot of responsibility. So elections is just one of many things that they have to become familiar with when they get elected to these positions. And so there's a lot that can be done, I think, to educate and inform them about the power and authority that they have. Quick plug, we have a handbook, which is just a statutory reference guide for county election officials. So if you want to pick one up and make sure that your county Board of Elections have them, that is great. But what are some of the other ways that the county boards can secure our elections in the counties where the board can agree on those security things?
Yeah, it's vitally important for you to understand that elections are really conducted at the county level in Pennsylvania. I think that might be unique in the United States. They have far greater authority than the governor, far greater authority than the Secretary of the Commonwealth. And we saw this. We saw this, and each county often has its own procedures. We saw how important it was to have educated, knowledgeable election officials in each county when we had our statewide recount in the Senate race. Mm-hmm. And we were in all 67 counties. It's very important that we get the right people elected there. And then even for those officials that are there, for them to understand, like I said, the rather nuanced and arcane measures under the election code and making sure they're just following the law. Guy said, rule of law. Just make sure they follow the law. We're not asking you to do anything dramatic. We're asking you to do what the legislature told you to do.
Absolutely, yeah. All right, well, thank you all for paying attention to our conversation about elections. Critically important, so thank you, guys.